Okay.
All right, we're live. Good evening, Sunday evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to come join us to learn a little bit more about Josh Clark for U.S. Senate, who happens to be my husband. And I just wanted to open it up and welcome you all and share a little bit about the front row seat that I've had for the 38 years I've gotten to know Josh. I met him when I was 2. I fell in love with him when I was 5. I actually told him I was going to marry him. And so I joked that he finally said yes when I was 18 years old. So it took him a little while, but he knows how to close a deal, he says. So, right?
That's right.
All right. So having a front row seat, one thing I did fall in love with him when he was a young boy was his compassionate heart and his servant heart towards others. I remember growing up and we would go over to his house. Our family, he was best friends with my oldest brother and our families were friends. And one thing I remember seeing is kind of his box of like belongings in the living room with a sleeping bag and pillow. And I remember asking one day what that was about. And it's because him and his brother had given up their room for about 3 years. I don't know exactly how many, but several years to a homeless family so they could use their bedroom. And so I know it was things like that that just really drew me to him as a little girl. And then we got married when I was 19, he was 22. And for us, marriage has all been about serving and on mission. And so we've gotten to do a lot together. We've built 2 successful businesses. And we've also gotten to campaign for a year when he ran for state house. And that's kind of the experience I want to share with you guys, because what we need now, when we think about the U.S. Senate seat, Congress, 2 years, president is 4. The Senate seat is 6 years. So we have got to get this one right. And I know that he's the fighter. He's also the compassionate conservative that we need to go and fix Washington. And so I got to see firsthand after we campaigned for a year, he served as our state in the state house. And I got to witness him going up there and being a voice for we, the people. And he did not let bad leadership or the good old boy club break him or his principles. He stood with a spine of steel under the Gold Dome in the state of Georgia. So I'm very excited to be on this journey with him as we fight for America. We fight for Georgians and for our voice, we the people. So here is your next U.S. Senator, Josh Clark. And I look forward to you hearing more about him and what he has for us. All right. Bye, guys. I'm going to step out and listen to him from here.
Well, I am so blessed, as you can tell, to have married my childhood sweetheart. And we are in this together, as Chelsea said, as a family. It's a family decision we made to step up and serve and crisscross the state of Georgia in our 45-foot bus in our campaign to serve as your next United States Senator to beat Raphael Warnock. Now, first, let me ask you all who are listening and joining us from all over the state of Georgia, how many of you want to send Raphael Warnock packing? We want to send him home, right? And so hopefully if you said yes, you are in the right place. And I'm going to share with you over the next few minutes why I believe that I am the proven conservative that you've been looking for to win this election in November and send him home. There is so much at stake, as Chelsea said, for the next generation. I am so blessed to have 6 children. And you can go to my website, votejosh.com, see a picture of our family. But we're in it for the next generation. In fact, I've always believed that that's what public service should be about. Not the next election, but it should truly be about the next generation. And I believe that at this point in time in our history, we are literally in a crisis, that America is at war. And there's a war for the heart and soul of this nation. There's a war for what we're about and what this country has stood for nearly 250 years, freedom and liberty. And this is something that for me really has been a burden for a long time, burden in as far as caring about who is our leadership and who is rising up to serve us, and knowing that it's incumbent upon us, as Chelsea said, we the people, to have a voice in that. It is our power, that is given to us by our Creator. It is our job to steward that and to, divest that power into those who are representing us for a season, for just a season. And we need to have a say in that. And so, in 2020, I'm curious how many of you, like me, had some sleepless nights, just really concerned by what was happening to our nation, watching our freedom, our liberty being taken right out from underneath us, watching a pandemic that our hearts were already breaking for the people who were suffering through that, but watching how that was being leveraged to take away our freedom. And I kept thinking about Patrick Henry's words, give me liberty or give me death, and realizing, that it's oftentimes, it's in times like these, the past couple of years, that if we're not vigilant, if we're not diligent to guard our freedom, that again, we can lose it and not pass it to the next generation. And Reagan said, he said that freedom, that liberty, that freedom is not passed in the bloodstream to the next generation. It's got to be fought for and defended, or else we'll be explaining to our children what it was like when men were free. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that just by evidence of the fact that you're here, that like me, you care about that, and you're concerned about what are we going to pass to our children and to our children's children. And so that brings us here today. And I want to tell you right up front, if you're looking for a celebrity, that's not me. I believe that we need to look deeper than just who is a celebrity. Not that that necessarily disqualifies somebody, but we've got to look deeper. We've got to do our due diligence as patriots to ask who will fight for us, who will fight for the next generation, and are they proven? Because as Chelsea said, 6 years is so long. Back in 2020, I watched as a pastor friend of ours in California was fined millions of dollars. And we went out and visited him in June, just months after the pandemic started. And what we witnessed broke our hearts. And then I watched, how by the way, they were trying to force them to shut down instead of giving them giving people choice in whether they wanted to attend church or not. I was watching the arbitrary standards but that defined what was essential and what wasn't. I watched as, doctors were being silenced and no longer able to speak to their patient from their medical training and from their experience, and no longer able to give advice to their patient based on what was right for them, but rather they were in fear too often. And I witnessed this in many occasions, afraid to treat the patient as they believed was best for that patient. And I don't know about you, but I absolutely do not want government interfering in the doctor-patient relationship. That I couldn't even believe that these things were happening. I couldn't believe that our First Amendment rights were being ripped out from underneath us. That monopolies that were created in part by Congress had gotten to the point where they decided who would have a voice and who wouldn't. That dictators and brutal dictators would be able to maintain their voice while the president, whether you agree with them or not, was silenced. So it was in these sleepless nights that I realized that I thought my time in public office was over. As Chelsea shared with you in the past, or shared with you earlier, I had served in the past 2 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But I'm proud of my service, but I served and I walked away. But I'm coming back again because I am concerned. And I believe that it's incumbent upon all of us to rise up to the challenges facing us and to overcome these challenges together. And I realize that I'm uniquely equipped in this race to stand up and fight for the next generation. And that's why I'm here. Now, I want to take you a little further back into my childhood, because I recognize I'm applying for this job to serve you. I don't see it so much as senator, although I know it's that, but I see it as more as servant. And it's up to you to decide, are you going to give me the privilege of fighting for our children? And so a little bit about what makes me who I am and why I'm uniquely qualified to go fight for us on day one. Well, I grew up in Suwanee, Georgia. I was the oldest of 10 children. My father was a pastor of a small church. So we were the poor talked about. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about. And my mother was a teacher who decided by education, to teach us to homeschool her children. Now, I'm so thankful for that, because I was blessed to learn history as it actually occurred. And I developed a deep respect and appreciation for our founding fathers and for the foundation that was laid that's allowed us to be a beacon of light and opportunity around the world. And I understood the biblical principles that were woven into the fabric and the constitution of this country that's allowed us to be able to address the issues and to fix the problems and to continue to be, again, that beacon of light, of freedom, of liberty. And I also was blessed to learn American family values. I think you know what I'm talking about. Hard work, faith in God, and service to others. My mother lost her health when I was a young child due to an accident where she lost a kidney, a spleen, and an adrenal. And due to complications from that, she got very sick. Now, what do you think happened to me as the oldest? Well, as you probably can imagine, I had to step up. But even though my childhood was very different, I wouldn't trade it for a moment, although I would undo it if it meant mom not being sick. But for me, God used it for good in me. It helped me to realize that life wasn't about me. Speaking of the celebrity in sports and being a football star, I begged to play football and loved sports and played every chance I had in the backyard. We were a very competitive, athletic family, but I didn't get to play on sports teams. It was a privilege. Number one, we really couldn't afford it. And number two, I had to work when I wasn't in schooling most of the time. I had to help with the family farm that we rented, and the goats and the chickens and the big garden. And then later on, my parents started a family business, and I was very involved in that business. And in fact, until I was 20, I helped with their business, and I had my own business, and I gave my money to help the family. Now, again, don't feel sorry for me at all. I'm so blessed. But it was unusual in maybe in the present age, but yet Americans for generations have been rising to incredible challenges over the last 250 years and overcoming together, and hence our slogan, because I believe that it's now up to us and this generation to ask ourselves, are we willing to make the sacrifices, to step up and save this republic? And fast forwarding out of high school, I got involved and started trying to help identify, just on a volunteer basis, godly constitutional conservatives and roll up my sleeves and help them get elected. And I did this throughout my 20s. I also served in different roles within the Republican Party. In fact, while one of my opponents was registering as a Democrat and then voted Democrat, I was working hard in both of those elections to turn this state red. I ended up working on both U.S. Senate races to help flip those U.S. Senate seats. And then at 30, after building two companies, volunteering for a lot of others, something happened that it wasn't part of my plans. I was challenged by somebody to consider running. Halfway through the month, I said, give me a month to think and pray about this. Halfway through, I said no. Now, at that moment, it was a selfish no, because I had just had my best month ever in business. I had plans. But then God really spoke to us. And I say us to not only me, but also my wife. There's a crazy story for another day, but it's a crazy story, much like what has happened this past year for us. And we knew that we had to step up and we had to serve. And I campaigned for an entire year in a race that people said I had zero chance. I heard it over and over. Good luck, son. Try again. Well, guess what happened? Thanks to God's blessing, an amazing team, and hard work, no one will outwork me. We ended up winning 70-30 in a landslide victory. I served 2 terms. Again, this is part of the proven conservative that you hear that I talked about in the beginning, and it's on our website and all. I served 2 terms, and I earned the Defender of Liberty Award for my conservative voting record. I got the highest endorsements from the Georgia Right to Life, the NRA. We balanced budgets, cut taxes, increased the rainy day fund, and put our state into a healthy place. We ended up becoming as I left, we ended up becoming the #1 state to do business in, which actually was my stated goal during my campaign. And I'm thankful to a team of us who helped to bring that about. But then I went back to private life because I believe that public service should be a season, don't you? Not a lifetime career. Now, too often we hear people say that, but how many times do we see that actually lived out? For the past 8 years, I've served as an executive vice president for an international company. It's been a privilege to work with a company that I believed in, whose products I was passionate about, and I helped turn around the North America market. But as I shared with you when we began tonight, in 2020, I began to become very concerned about the world, the country that my children were going to inherit. And I couldn't deny that I saw what was happening. If my children were to ask me one day, Dad, did you see? I'd have to say yes. And so it was during those times and watching and concerned. And then, quite frankly, as a person of faith, I'm guided by that. Felt the Lord really speak to us in one of the most clear ways over and over and over. In fact, I had people come up and challenge me right in line with what private conversations that my wife and I were having out of the blue, a Romanian guy who watched his country taken over by communism challenged me. And he said, you know what? I believe you can quit your executive role and feed your family and serve our country. And we don't know this country will even be here in a few years. I ended up saying to him, well, why don't you run? But later on, I became convicted, not that day, but in days to come, that I was supposed to step up. And that's another story for another day, because a lot of pieces to that. And another guy who challenged me at church out of the blue and me fasting and praying. But anyway, I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that I played it safe and I wasn't willing to sacrifice it all. As I told my family when we gathered together to talk about this, because this is a family decision, because if you look at the front of our Liberty bus, it says faith, family, and freedom. Those three things are very important to me. And for me, even though this is not part of our next 5-year plans or even at all plans in our life, we've disrupted our life greatly. But I told my children, I said, the reality is we need people to serve with the mentality of our founding fathers who signed that document, who pledged their life, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. I think of John Hancock, the biggest signature of them all, loud and bold. And yet the moment he signed that, his merchant ships quit trading and he died in a debtor's prison. And I feel that too often we hear all the right messages on the campaign trail, but because they're not proven conservatives, too often we become disappointed. And oftentimes, again, we see it from celebrities, we see it in military people, and I love the military. I got 4 brothers who serve in the front lines. I have 13 immediate family members. But as my brother, David Clark, who's an Army Ranger and now in bad to the bone training, is reenlisted and also serves as a state rep. Just because you're military doesn't necessarily mean that you'll stand alone by yourself if need be. And that's my track record. And I can tell you stories of that, of being tested in the house and standing firm. And by God's grace, I'll do it again. I've signed a term limit pledge. We've sold all of our stock. And my wife and I have pledged that we will not trade stocks while I'm in the U.S. Senate, because I think it's disgusting how people sign up supposedly to serve and then end up getting rich and staying for decades and decades in office. What are some of the issues that I'm concerned about? Well, we've talked about some of them from the very beginning, things like freedom and liberty. But what about our debt, which also affects that? At $30 trillion and climbing. Folks, that is stealing from our children's children. That is the same thing. All these stimulus packages and all these, this omnibus bill that was just passed a week before last, in the dead of night, passed through the Rules Committee, with all this wasteful spending in it. I could go on and on about the details of that bill. It'll make you mad. But here's the reality. It's like taking a loan from our children's children for us to live more comfortably today. It's disgusting. It's sick, isn't it? How would you ever think to do that? To borrow from your children's future earnings at the bank? Of course you wouldn't. But yet that's exactly what we're doing. And what's worse than that, not only are we stealing from them, but at the rate that we are stealing from the next generation, we are at the point of no return. We are just that close. And so I will fight for that. I'm a penny pincher. I know the difference between needs and wants. And I will be that budget hawk. Number 2, well, I'll put it this way, freedom and liberty, number 1. Number 2, our debt. Number 3, right there at the top, they're all right there together, is our borders. Our borders are not secure, and it's a national security risk, major risk. Secondly, it is actually killing our youth. The number 1 cause of death from 18 to 45-year-olds is drug overdoses. Much of that is fentanyl, and much of that is coming from China. Just yesterday, I was talking with a gentleman. He said, I need to talk to you. He said, I have 2 friends who have both lost their children from drug overdoses. One only whose contact wasn't even using the drug, but was actually trying to administer CPR to another friend. Y'all, this fentanyl, there's enough fentanyl in the United States to kill every man, woman, and child. We should be alarmed. We should be off of our couches. We should put our entertainment aside. We should do whatever it takes to save the next generation. This is serious. Also, sex trafficking. As a state legislator, I fought sex trafficking. And now last summer, I was challenged by a guy who runs sting operations in Central America. He said, Josh, your open borders, unsecured borders are killing and preying upon our youth. I was embarrassed and ashamed of the leadership of our country. Everything rises and falls on leadership. So that's why I ask you to give me a chance. I ask you because I'm a proven conservative. I'm not a celebrity, but I can win in November. I want to share with you a joke that's at the end packs a punch. I share it for a purpose, but we've also talked about a lot of serious issues and I want to have a little fun as well. Can we do that? All right. So if you're a pastor, I want to ask you to give me a little grace here. Okay. So there was a US senator who was on his way to a town hall. He got run over by a Mack truck. And so he came before the pearly gates and St. Peter asked him, he said, well, do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell? And he said, well, I never thought I'd say this, but seeing as that, actually, I'm getting ahead of my joke there as I'm thinking, I'm multitasking here. He said, seeing as that I've always hoped I could get to heaven, he says, I'll choose heaven. He said, well, that's not how it works. That works. He said, you spend a day in hell and then a day in heaven, you make your decision. He said, all right, if it has to be. So he goes down, 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 and the doors open. And to his surprise, it's this beautiful golf course. So next thing you know, he's off in the distance. He's teeing up with his friends and has a wonderful day. And the angel comes to him and says, all right, well, now it's time to go to heaven. He says, well, I can't imagine it being any better. But next thing you know, he's on the clouds with the saints worshiping the Lord and his time is up. The angel says, it's time to make your decision for all of eternity. He said, well, I never thought I would say this, but seeing as that most of my friends are in hell, no surprise, right? He said, I think I'll choose hell. So he goes down, down, the doors open. And now, to his horror, his friends are in torment. They're dressed in rags, on fire. And so he feels like he's been lied. He's been deceived. You ever felt like that from politicians, right? So he goes and he finds the devil. He says, I don't understand. The devil says, oh, that's easy to explain. Yesterday we were campaigning and today you voted. You see, I've been sharing that since when I first ran for state house, because my commitment back then was to make sure that I was the same person in office that I was when I campaigned, which is why I kept my mailers on my coffee table in my office so I could flip through it and remind myself of what I promised. You see, I ask you to share that with your friends, the punchline of that joke, because I realize you're watching this. Therefore, I believe you're a patriot. You're somebody concerned about making sure that we elect the right person, a proven conservative. But we need to speak with our friends as well. We can no longer remain silent. Silence is almost just as bad as those who are doing evil. I think of Martin Luther King Jr., who said that silence is, and actually I'll remember the quote here in a moment, but it's a quote that I love, but it talks about, all that, I'll put it this way, all that it takes for evil to prevail is for men of good conscience to do nothing, right? So we've got to rise up, and I'm going to ask you to do that. We have nice people in this race, but we need to flip one U.S. Senate seat to take back control of the Senate. We cannot elect a John McCain, great military guy, right? So far as I know, right? And I appreciate him, the years he spent as a POW. But when he got to the U.S. Senate, he let us down. And by God's grace, I won't do that. I have a proven track record where you can see who I am and what I'll stand for. I'm not just showing up in the last 2 years saying, elect me. And I'm not like one of my opponents who voted Democrat, as I shared earlier, Latham Sadler. He may be a different person. I love bringing Republicans in, but we need to prove them before we send them to the U.S. Senate. What about Herschel, my childhood hero? Seriously, I didn't want to jump in this race against him, but it's not about him. It's not about me. It's about the next generation. If you read his book, you'll know what I'm talking about. I don't want to speak about what's in the book. I'll let you read it. I forgive him. We should forgive him, but the Democrats will not forgive him. They've already told me that that they want him as the opponent against Raphael Warnock. If you read the book, you'll understand. If you continue to do research and look at other things that happen later, you'll understand what I mean. He needs to be on the field. He needs to be on the bus, however you want to word it. We're all on it together, but we need to make sure the right person is in the seat going to the US Senate. There's too much at stake to gamble this and roll the dice. So here's what I'll leave you with. I want to leave you with the Patriots Pledge. This is my promise. This has always impacted me. And it was found, the Patriots Pledge, this little slip of paper was found in the pocket of a World War I soldier. He had given his all, literally, on the battlefield. And on this note, it said, America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will sacrifice, I will save, I will endure, I will give my utmost as if the issue of the whole depended upon me and me alone. That is my promise to you. If you know me and my track record, it's there. There's proof. I will be that kind of guy. I will fight for the next generation. I will make my mother proud, who always challenged me, and all of us. That's why so many served in the military and served in different capacities. She'd always say, well, spending money on this, well, spending time on that, will that make this world a better place? Will that serve humanity? And so it's time for Americans to step up and sacrifice, and I'll be that guy. But you know what? It's not just about me taking that commitment and pledge. I'm going to ask you to make the same. And I'm also going to remind you of a quote that's encouraging that my sister shared with me 20 years ago. And it says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do as we close this out. I'm going to ask you, will you pray for us? Will you stand with us? I'm not asking you to sacrifice necessarily what we are sacrificing, or to walk away from your job like people have done on my team. So many volunteers have walked away from everything to say, we believe that you are that person to step up and serve us in such a time as this. And they're paying a heavy price. I'm not even asking you to do that. I'm asking you, will you commit to being a Minutemen and Minutewomen? They're the ones who saved the Revolutionary War. Will you step up and use your moments? And will you be bold and ask people to vote with us, to stand with us? Will you request and pick up and do whatever it takes to get at least 6 yard signs, one for you and 5 to place in 5 friends' yards? And then will you ask them to do the same and pay it forward, and then pay it forward once more? If we do that, we will win this race without a runoff. I did it 12 years ago. We're going to do it again with your help, God's blessings, and I'm going to give everything I have and leave it on the field. And I'll never forget my brother at 23 years old, who said to me when I was running for State House, he was in Afghanistan on the front lines. And he said, brother, what you're doing, he said, is just as important as what I'm doing. Because if we lose this country, then my comrades who lost their life is in vain. That's what I remembered every time I walked into that dome. That's what I'll remember in Washington, D.C. as I fight for us. I'm finally going to ask you to, will you go to our Facebook? Will you go to our website, votejosh.com, click on the social media links, like it, share it. In fact, if you do that, you can win an AR-15. I'm giving away an Anderson AR-15 every weekend of the election. Do you think I believe in the Second Amendment? You better believe I do. In fact, we're going to help arm and equip citizens to make sure that they are ready to defend liberty. They are ready to protect their families, their communities as peaceful, loving patriots. And so please do that. And then finally, you consider donating. I do need your help. We're sacrificing, but I need to ask you, will you consider it? If it's $5, I'm grateful. If it's $2,900, that's even better. But either way, I appreciate if each will give according to their ability. If you're not able to give, then please just share. And I need everyone to do that, please. Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for you and your consideration. And whether you vote for me or not, I pledge to work hard for you and to serve the next generation. Thank you so much, and God bless. If you have questions, please go to the social media channel that you're watching this. Please post those questions, and I'll do my best to answer them and get back to you. We look forward to welcoming you to the team, and together we're going to overcome for the sake of the next generation. God bless.